Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be going over the Tempest builds that I used for my Challenger 400 first clear. It's worth mentioning that these builds would also work great for Gauntlet or just any PvE content where you actually need some kind of survivability for the Tempest. So the build might seem a bit strange, but it's actually very effective and still does a decent amount of damage. So when I tested this on the dummy, it did about 6.5 million damage per second. So it still really does do a lot of damage, but the great thing is that it actually does a lot of support and it also has some really good survivability. So let's look at the first build that I used for the actual run, and then I had a different build for the boss that I'll also go through. So for the skills, I used Windwalk, I used Rolling Surf, Vortex, Crosswinds, and for the primary attack I went for Wind Edge. Let's quickly go over the essence now. So for the essence I used Deceitful Whispers and also the Grassblade Edge main hand for Windwalk. So both of these buff Windwalk. One gives you the extra duration for Windwalk and the other one gives you extra cooldown. So this effect is actually really crazy, and it's actually really good for PvP as well, but I actually found it's really good for PvE. And the reason for that is now in the game we don't really have that many immune effects. Most of the immune effects for Wizard and also for Necromancer got nerfed. Basically what Windwalk does, if we take a look at it from the skills, is that it conjures a Cyclone for 2.5 seconds, which increases your primary attack speed and makes you untargetable while you remain in the storm. So basically you're not taking any damage because the monsters don't even know where you are while you stand inside the Windwalk. So the downside of this is that you do have to stand still, and the area of the Windwalk is pretty small. But especially in a challenge rift where you don't need to move around that much, to be honest, and because I also had the CC from the Vortex, this actually was very effective. I could just stand still pretty much for half the time because this would have 50% uptime pretty much with the duration increase and also with all of the cooldowns. So back to the essence now, let's quickly take a read of this one here. So what this says is that Windwalk's cooldown is reduced by 0.24 seconds each time you deal a critical hit. This can occur more than 10 times every 9 seconds. So basically, because I'm always critical hitting, even though I'm not doing that much damage, I'm still applying a lot of critical hits. And basically, this effect is always going to go off. So it's going to happen 10 times. So it's going to give me a 2.4 second cooldown. And this is on top of the cooldown that I get from the Awakening from both of these. So I get 10% cooldown Awakening on both of these, and then I also have cooldown on here another 10%, and also in my Heliquary remains, if we take a look, I think I have 6%, I want to say, yeah, 6% skill cooldown reduction. So basically I'm overcapping the cooldown for a Windwalk, but also with this increased effect you also get a lot more Windwalks. So basically half the time I'm hidden within this Windwalk. As long as I remember to press it at the right time and stand still, then basically I'm going to be untargetable and the mobs won't be able to do anything to me. So the other core part of this build, like I mentioned, is Vortex. So with Vortex I went for 3 essence. It's the Overflow essence. As you guys know, if you've played Tempest before, it gives you this circle around you and it keeps sprouting up this water, which is going to consistently knock up enemies. This effect is really good in challenge rifts, and pretty much also in a lot of different builds. People love this essence. I think it's one of the player favorites, to be honest. So the other essence that I'm using is the Shoal. So this is also a crucial essence to use because it gives you a 28.5% armor break, and because we have 100% uptime of Vortex, this works really well together and is always going to give this armor break to myself and also my friend in the rift. So it's a really good for support as well. And then the last essence that I'm using for Vortex is the Offhand, and this one basically gives you attack speed. So it says Vortex also increases your primary attack speed by 28.5. This is kind of a no-brainer if you're using Vortex. So these are the 3 essences I'm using for Vortex. And then let's move on to Rolling Surf. So for Rolling Surf, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you're going to be using Rolling Surf, this is the essence that you want to use in your build. This just gives you the maximum amount of damage, the Sky Imparter. So I'm not going to read through this. I think you guys already know how it works and how much damage it gives. So finally, for Crosswinds, I decided to ditch the Shriekworth because I'm using this for Windwalk, and instead I decided to just use Hurricane Hitch. And then finally, for the last essence, I was using Howling Anchor, which gives you an extra bleed effect for your Crosswinds. So Crosswinds also causes enemies to bleed, dealing 6.3k damage. So this one's also incredibly good. So the reason I went for this is the bleed effect will enable my 2-piece Banquet. It's always going to have 100% uptime, but not only this, because my friend is playing with a Torrential Refrain offhand for Crusader, it's going to keep resolving the bleed damage instantly rather than having it per second for 5 seconds. So as far as the sets go, I went for 4 pieces of Vithu, which is a no-brainer. You want that extra attack speed, you want the extra beneficial effect duration, and then for the other pieces I just went for 2 pieces of Banquet, And then because I'm not using any dashes, I opted to actually break my Gloom Guide 2-piece, and I just went for combat rating here. So these are both the max combat ratings. The most optimal setup for this build, if you don't need the combat rating, would probably be something like 4-piece Vithu and then 4-piece Banquet, or 4-piece Vithu and 4-piece Grace would also work really well. A couple more few things that I want to mention here is that I actually decided to change my gem setup slightly. So for my damage over time gems, because my friend was also using the same setup with Seeping Bile, for example, I decided to actually auxiliary these gems so that his effect would always go off. So basically, I think that when there's 2 players or more having the same kind of gem, if a dot effect goes off from one player, you're not going to be able to overlap it with your dot effect. Let's say that my effect of Seeping Bile went off with a rank 6 effect, and his effect with a rank 10 basically won't be able to go off on the same mob while mine is active. So I decided to basically force his gem to always take precedence by auxiliarying a rank 1 Frozen Heart here. I'm not sure if this was the correct choice, to be honest, but I think it did make a difference because basically his dot gems would take priority and they would always go off first. The other thing that I decided to do is go for the different warband rooms. So here I went for the attacker warband room, but not the usual one that I go for, which is the damage one. I decided to go for this one here, which says that critical hits increase the attack speed of nearby allies. So this just gave an extra support to my friend because, let's face it, he was doing about 90%, maybe 85%, I would say, of the damage, and I was doing about 10 to 15% of the total damage. So I just really wanted to go for the full supporter role here and maximize the amount of damage that he does, because especially on the boss, where the boss has 1.2 billion health, he really needs to be basically alive at all times, and I'm just giving him the extra buffs so that he can actually take down the boss. Finally, for my familiar here, I just decided to go for a standard familiar, nothing really fancy, just with the savior skill immunity. And normally I would go for a Brood Talon with lingering wounds, but because I already had the armor break effect from my Vortex, and because my friend was also running another pet with lingering wounds, I decided to actually opt for more of the survivability with the savior here, and this actually did save me quite a lot in the challenge rift. So I'll move on now to show the second build, which is the build that I used for the boss. So I only changed up a few of the essence, everything else remained pretty much the same. So the skills also did become a bit different. So I'm still using Windwalk because I really like the survivability it gives, and it didn't sacrifice that much damage. I'm using Rolling Surf, I'm still using the Vortex, and then finally I replaced Crosswinds for Cascade, and I'll be explaining why. So if we just take a quick look at the essence here. So for Cascade, I'm using 2 essence here, so I decided to drop the Windwalk helmet. Even though it's a really good helmet, I kind of have to use this Cascade here to enable the chest effect. So for this, it just says Cascade empowers you and your Zephyrs to basically release waves when you hit enemies, so it becomes basically a buff, which is going to have 100% uptime when I used it, and when I attack, it's going to basically launch the waves and enable me to get off the second effect, which is the Fade to Bronze effect, which is one of the most powerful support essence for the Tempest. So it reads that Cascade also causes enemies hit to become vulnerable, taking 47.5% increase critical hit damage for 4 seconds. So this is one of the best essence, like I said, and I did some tests on the dummy, and this performed really well. It boosted the damage of my friend hugely. So this is something that I would recommend you guys to do, is always, if you're running challenge rift or any kind of group content, is that you try going into the dummy area and testing the damage and seeing how much you can buff your friend's damage up by. So this gave by far the best buff. I did also try to use Storm Fury, but it really didn't give that much damage. In fact, it kind of performed really poorly. So it says primary attacks unleash slashes of wind, dealing 40% increased damage for your primary attack. I suspect it's because my friend wasn't using a really primary attack based build, but the results with this were really underwhelming. So I decided to just go for Cascade here with these 2 essence. Other than that, I'm still using the Shoal here with Vortex. So now, because we don't have the Vortex circle around us, we have this effect here, which kind of looks like a whirlpool, and it kind of lingers, which is really nice. So it basically means that I do have a downtime of about 2 seconds for my Vortex, but this is absolutely fine because the Shoal effect lasts for 3 seconds. So while it hits the last tick on the boss, it's still going to last for this extra 3 seconds, which is fine. So now, because we dropped Crosswinds for Cascade, I opted to go for this pants here, which isn't really doing that much. It's just going to give me extra attack speed while I have a Zephyr. Unfortunately, this build isn't really relying on Zephyrs, so it's not really going to be summoning that many, aside from the Zephyrs that we get from the passive skill, which is the Mist-Touch passive skill, which give you a Zephyr time interval. So it's kind of okay. So other than that, the other essence I'm using are pretty much the same. I'm still using the Windwalk duration here. I just found it's really valuable to actually use Windwalk for this tough PvE content. So probably probably when we actually do our gauntlets, I'm probably going to be using a build that's similar to this. And then for the offhand, because like I said, we're not using crosswinds, I'm using Sip of Breath, which just says that when I pick up the Mist Touch orbs, I'm getting an attacks and movement speed boost. So this is just a generally decent essence to use. I suspect between these two builds that I'm using that there's also potential for a really good PvP variant of these builds, so I will be testing a PvP build over the next few days, and I might update you guys on my channel if I find something that's worth posting. The last trick that I want to say is actually I'm going to show the secondary stats. So you can see here, these are my secondary stats, which are nowhere near the recommended secondary stats for the challenge rift. So it's 8.3 for the armor and armor penetration that's required, and the potency and resistance is about 8k or 8.1k, I can't remember. But either way, I'm nowhere near the requirement for these secondary stats, and you might actually notice that these secondary stats are a lot lower than what I usually have. And the reason for that is because I actually used a trick which I like to use, which is to reset the legacy of the Horadrim. And I went for the opposite strategy of what you're supposed to do with this. So normally what people recommend is to maximize the armor and also armor penetration. And also if you're playing a potency or resistance build, you also want to be maximizing those. But what I decided to do here is screw all of that and just go for pure damage and pure life. Because my secondary stats were nowhere near the recommended value, it didn't matter if I was another 1k underneath that secondary stats, I still wouldn't get any bonus towards the critical hit damage or the potency with the increased harmful effect duration. So that's why I just decided to go for full damage. Now that I have cleared the rift, I will be resetting my legacy of Horadrim, and I will be fixing this obviously before I hop into PvP again. But yeah, that's about all that I want to share for this one, guys. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. I'm really proud that we did manage to get the clear here. But with that, I'm going to be signing off, and I'm going to catch you all in the next video. Peace.